And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday, and Friday is the most important day of the week because it is the day that the Heartland Institute broadcasts this here Climate Realism Show. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm Vice President of the Heartland Institute and your host for today. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere. So I hope you will like, share, and subscribe and leave your comments underneath this video. All of that stuff helps convince YouTube's algorithm to smile upon this program and get the show in front of even more people. And a quick reminder, because big tech and the legacy media do not approve of the way that we cover climate and energy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. What a shock. So if you want to support this program, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS, which stands for the Climate Realism Show. That will help us keep making this show happen every single week. Any support you can give is warmly welcome and greatly appreciated. And we also today want to thank our streaming partners that help get this show out to as many eyes as possible. That's junkscience.com, CFAC, and What's Up With That. So today on our show, we have with us our usual crew. We have Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute and publisher of the most influential climate website in the world, What's Up With That. We have H. Sterling Burnett, Director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute, and Linnea Lukin, Research Fellow for Energy and Environment Policy at Heartland. And we are very happy to welcome back a very special guest, Joe Bastardi. He's the Chief Forecaster at WeatherBELL Analytics, and he is one of the leading hurricane experts and historians in the world. There is really nobody much better we could have had on today's show to talk about the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and where it sits in the annals of hurricane history. Welcome, Joe Bastardi, and welcome everyone else to what should be a really fun show.
Well, thank you for having me. I realize it's a big risk.
It is a big risk. I was joking with Joe Bastardi and everyone on this show. We've known each other for many years. Yeah. He's spoken and attended many of the 15 international conferences on climate change that we've had. And I was joking just before we went on the air that Joe Bastardi, you are an agent of chaos everywhere you go. So this should be quite the exciting program today.
I'll tell you what's agent of chaos. This fly I've been trying to kill since this morning. I think it's the devil or one of these climate hoaxers put a fly in my house. I do want to say something to the folks. So the reason I'm the way I am is every morning's a gift to me. Every morning I got to get up and work at 4:30. I don't call it work because we have clients in the private sector. And I am just so blessed to do what I do every day. It's like I'm happy when I'm doing the weather or talking about the weather. So I do tend to get carried away, but I want you to know most of the stuff I say, I don't think about before and I don't remember after because it's flowing out of my heart through my head or whatever. It's like Bob Dylan. You ever listen to a Bob Dylan song, you go, what the heck are you talking about?
Hey, Joe, do you know what the difference is between you and climate alarmist?
I like when the weather goes crazy. No, what?
No, you wake up every morning and say it's a gift. Climate alarmists wake up every morning and say it's a grift.
Well, that's an interesting and a good point. But see, I don't think they wake up every morning looking at the weather. They only look at the weather when the weather is actually showing up. As far as what I have to do is set up weather patterns. And I believe we're in the golden age of forecasting now, except that you can't just look at models. If you can line up what some of the models are saying with what has happened in the past, if you have a functioning knowledge of something where, oh, I've seen that before, it was such and such a time in the 1930s or 40s, it really gives you an advantage. So these old eyes I have in some cases are wise eyes. So anyway.
Well, yeah, and as I said, you could talk all day about hurricanes and the weather. Unfortunately, we only have an hour, so we're going to try to fit as much information out of you and the rest of the panel.
Let me just say this, okay? I will have my own hour along with some of my I have a crazy crew. We start Sunday, if you're around New York City or you're listening on the web, AM 970 The Answer. We have a 1 hour weather, climate, and anything else I want to talk about show that's starting. So that's Sunday at 5 o'clock. It'll be on just before the markets open up. So some of you energy experts want to get a jump on the weather and then subscribe, of course, to WeatherBELL. It's going to be a pretty good thing. But we're going to have a lot. Probably you guys are going to show up as guests sometime, whether you like it or not. So, and gals. Right. I'm sorry about that. I didn't include everybody. I want to be.
That's okay. All right. We're only 6 minutes in, and this show's already going to go off the rails. So let's start with one of our favorite segments of this show, and that is the crazy climate news of the week. Hit that drop, producer Andy. Yes. Bill Nye. So like I said, Joe, Bill Nye better not watch this program, or he may never come on your show. All right. So our first item today is something actually we hit on last week as Hurricane Helene was coming to the United States from the Gulf of Mexico, and that is how much electric vehicles hate salt water. There's a story in the Business Insider, actually. I'm surprised to have seen it there, showing that viral videos have been spreading on X and Facebook and other places, showing electric vehicles catching fire after Hurricane Helene. And there seems to be now this realization that EVs and saltwater are a very bad mix. And I think here we have on the screen, we should have a video, Andy, of a car on fire in a garage, caught by somebody's nest. There it is. Those are not sound effects, folks. That's the sound of that car about ready to consume the entire garage. So, So last week, before the hurricane came, an official in Florida told people to take their electric vehicles and head to high ground with them. Good luck. It's Florida. And we'll see. And we saw actually in the Appalachians that high ground doesn't really keep you safe from destructive water. But anyway, Linnea, you can comment on this. We can maybe move on, or everyone can comment. But do you own an EV, Linnea? And if not, I heard that there are some lightly used but overcooked ones in Florida that you can get for a good price.
Yeah, thanks. I'll trade you for the bridge that I have. No, I do not own an EV. Like I've said in the past, I'm not going to say that they'll never get to the technological level that they need to be and the safety level that they need to be for someone like me to consider it. It would be I would have very high standards for it, just because I do go on very long road trips relatively frequently. So right now it's just not a good fit. But I don't mean to trash them so much, but the level to which they're pushed by our governments, by activists, is they're just not there yet. Yeah, and having so many of them in hurricane prone areas, because they are pretty popular on the coast, because the coast happen to be where the big cities are, and EVs kind of have their niche in city environments. It's a bad combination. High density population, vehicle that has a higher potential of catching on fire. And normal combustion engine cars also tend to have these lithium batteries, but the difference is where it's placed in the vehicle. A combustion engine car's battery is going to be in the engine block area, kind of off the ground a bit more, whereas the EV battery is like pretty much the bottom of the car, one of the first places that is going to start getting soaked in most cases. So yeah, no,
but-
it's not ideal. But we were talking about those plastic bags. Everybody, if you live in Florida and you want to have an electric car, get one of those big drive-in plastic bags so you can drive your car into the plastic bag for the hurricane. And I'm kind of
wanna
laughing 'cause
say-
it sounds silly, but it works.
I'm going to have to correct you, Linnea. Unless something has changed, internal combustion engine cars don't typically have lithium ion batteries. They have lead acid batteries. That's what I still use in mine. You can add water if they get low. You're not supposed to have to, but hybrids may have rechargeable batteries, but the lithium ion is rechargeable. Most I don't know of internal combustion engines vehicles that have those kinds of batteries. You're right that they're not there yet. You said, I don't want to foreclose the chance that they won't become effective to suit your needs. They just haven't done so over the 170 years since they first started them with electric trains back in the early 1900s. The first electric cars in the late 1890s. They tried to compete. They couldn't. They didn't do well then. They still don't do well today. And it's not just some random public official. I think it was the chief fire marshal in the state, the emergency management marshal, said get them to high ground. In the aftermath, DeSantis came out, I believe, and had a speech, said, look, get your vehicles out of your garage. Get them out of the garage, so if they catch fire because of high water, your house doesn't go up. Now, personally, I don't think I'd want to get into my electric vehicle and drive it through water to a safe place. But there you go.
Gentlemen, start your Teslas. Haha. No, I will tell you this. I think the whole, I call it optional supplemental industry, whether it's wind or solar or EVs. I think they're optional supplements. It's just like, I still bodybuild. I tell every people that I'm actually competing in a month, but I have a lot of supplements. If I were to turn this camera around, you take a look at the supplements, say, what the heck? Right. But they're no steroids. All right. That's illegal. So at least for me, but the situation is that those will never be my main diet. My main diet is food. It will always be food. So our main diet will always be fossil fuels unless we want to literally destroy ourselves, which I do believe part of this is not about destroying the American society completely, but just cutting it down to size. After all, Barack Obama, in his book, said that, the penalty for what we've done in the United States is 100% redistribution. That was that fly, I tell you, flying around over here. 100% redistribution of American wealth. If people had read what Obama actually wrote, they would understand where we are now. And you say, what are you bringing up Obama for? Because a lot of this is because of a complete idea of control. Okay, if you can't, people think the eagle is the sign of American freedom. No, it's not. It's the car. It's the fact that I am going to be getting in a car at 4:00 and driving to my Aunt Eleanor's tonight because it's her birthday tomorrow. I'm taking her out to dinner. Now, if I'm going to go in an electric vehicle, I'm going to be searching the darn Connecticut Turnpike, which you might as well go get a root canal to find an EV charger, and I have to plan my whole trip around it. So the whole thing is, it's a supplement. You have a lot of money, you want to buy one. I've got no problem with that at all. Go for it. But to force it on people, when something is forced upon you, you have to try to think, well, why is this person forcing this upon me and getting in the way of free will? Number one gift God gave us is free will. We get to use it whichever way we want. So I come from a different angle. Supplementation, I don't have any problems with supplements. Go take them if you want, but don't force it and make it your main diet.
Yep, 100%. Yep. And in fact, they even said that you needed to move your electric bikes and electric scooters away from the house during the storm. So not exactly very practical. So even if, yeah.
No,
All right,
out of that.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and hit our second item here in the crazy climate news of the week. And it is who steered Hurricane Helene? This is from
I did. Me. It was me. It was
Joe Bastardi.
This is real
That's right.
tinfoil hat territory, I tell you.
Yeah. So Anthony shared this with us. This is something that triggers him. And so this is from an account called Into Thin Air. It says, alarm, Hurricane Helene steered into the coast. This is a very scary topic. Warning you now. Helene was modified to flood North Carolina and control lithium production in the U.S. ? Will this will blow your mind? All sources attached. We are discussing theories and evidence, so no community notes. You are not needed. And goes on and on in that vein. So Anthony, who steered Hurricane Helene? Was it God or was it man?
It was just simply the weather. That's it. The currents aloft. There was just, it's amazing to me that people will get off on these conspiracy theories that the government is somehow controlling the weather. It's absurd. I mean, there was, of course, the big conspiracy theory with HAARP, HAARP up in Alaska, with his transmitter that was shooting up radio beams into the ionosphere for research. Well, this thing's only got a power of about 1 megawatt in pulses. And, we're talking about hectowatts of power in the Earth's atmosphere. It's tremendous amount of power in the Earth's atmosphere. We can't affect it. We cannot, set off a nuclear bomb and steer a hurricane, because a hurricane has the power of hundreds, if not thousands, of nuclear bombs in it. So it's just not possible. The same thing with cloud seeding. Cloud seeding only enhances what's already there. It provides more cloud nuclei for condensation for rain to form. So it basically squeezes more water out of the clouds. It does not create rain out of thin air. These conspiracy theories about, steering hurricanes, controlling the weather, they're just that. They're conspiracy theories that are they're pushed by people that don't have a full understanding of science and the atmosphere. Kind of like climate alarmist.
Anthony's exactly right. You had two ordinary events. You say hurricane. Yeah, a major hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico in September is a normal event. All right, that's going to happen. It's not rocket science, right? So, and you had an upper air feature in September buckling into the Tennessee Valley. A lot of times they play off each other. When they combine, the two normal events combined can produce the extraordinary event. And I'm partial against this stuff because I do believe we should try to seed intensifying hurricanes coming to the coast to disrupt the eye wall processes. That is one thing I did. And how would you mitigate the storm? The storm would still be the same size, but maybe you knock it down a category, because when you start disrupting eye wall processes, the turbulent transfer does change with the hurricane. Project Storm Fury showed that back in 1969 with Debbie out in the middle of nowhere. I do believe a lot of people don't want to see that, because I'm sorry, I'm cynical. They want to see big storms hit the United States because it pushes their whole climate change agenda. But, I'm partial. It's December 7th. We put out a forecast for a hurricane season from hell with where we had, I put it on Twitter 1,000 times since then, where we had all this impact, which is aimed at the Southeast United States. On September 8th, another one of my attention Governor DeSantis tweets came out saying the last week of September, this pattern favors a major impact storm for the Southeast United States. And the reason we can see that, it's actually fascinating what's going on, that the Mount-Julian oscillation, I think, was destructively interfered with at the height of the hurricane season this year by how warm it was in China and throughout the Far East and in the Northwest Pacific. This means that you had a lowering of surface pressures. I went back and researched 2005 and 2020 versus this year, because, we had a main development region, no El Nino. Why aren't there 42 storms or whatever Michael Mann was screaming about? Because Michael Mann is not looking at the entire global situation. So what happened is, we from mid-August to almost mid-September, we got stuck in the unfavorable phases for hurricanes of the Madden-Julian oscillation. It went right into 4, 5, and 6. So you had to fight, had Francine develop, had to fight to develop. This system now is going to develop, I think, but it's going to fight to develop. It's going to take 4 or 5 days. Look what happened with Beryl when we were in phase 3, a favorable phase. It exploded in 36 hours. Every major hurricane that has hit the United States, with the exception of Irma, has hit during phases 8, 1, 2, or 3 of the Madden-Julian oscillation since 2017. And they're all developing in close to the coast. Remember, Helene was only a major hurricane for 24, 36 hours when you saw Ida, right? All these, there's a reason for all these things. And believe it or not, climate change, not man-made, has something to do with it. So what happened is I researched all this. I said, aha, China is going to cool down. The seasonal cooling of the atmosphere, even though the anomalies, folks, may still be above normal, it's still cooling quicker in the north than to the south. So bang, September, we put out an article on CFAX September 4th, September 8th. We said, look out, mid and late September into mid-October, this is coming right back up again. And I started warning some of the people on my side of the global warming issue, would you please keep quiet and quit spiking all about this season, right? Oh my gosh, it hasn't been nearly as bad. It still isn't over. The record for most hurricane hits on the United States coast is 6. We've had 4 now. If there's another hit on Florida next week, and I believe there's going to be a hurricane hit on Florida next week coming from the Gulf of Mexico, and the end game comes out of the Caribbean, you would have tied the record for most hurricane hits on the U.S. coast. So the point I'm saying is that there are interesting things that are going on in other areas of the world that you'll never hear about on the Weather Channel. You'll never hear about what Fox Weather or all. None of these guys look at this stuff, or if they are, they're not getting out in front of it. And that is part of the problem we have, folks. And I've been trying to tell people in the United States government, some of the people I know, you've got to get out in front of an event 5, 6, 7 days away, say to the public, this is going to happen and why. And you should have meteorologists that know, I'm actually trying to plug myself here. You can see this stuff coming. When all this stuff comes out with Helene, I'm like, what don't you understand about biblical flooding, which is what we put in our forecast on the 24th? And it's just really strange being this old, and with the amount of knowledge and research we have out there, watching all this go on, is I feel like it's no country for old weathermen here. Anyway, I'm sorry about the rant.
That's why we bring you on, Joe.
Sterling, I get carried away. I know I do. But whatever.
Sterling?
Well, I just want to say, look, all this Helene hype, Helene was horrific. It was not unprecedented. Asheville has been flooded a number of times before, including, I think, 2 hurricanes hit back to back near the region and flooded. It's a valley, folks, a very narrow valley it sits in with rain back in 1912 or something.
1916.
And long before anyone was talking about human greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, by the way. But I think that the best take on it was the Babylon Bees story. I don't know if we have it up, but the headline of the story I just thought was perfect. Oh, there it is. Yes. Her experts say, I can't find it in my comments section anymore. I can't read it. Hold on. I'm going to blow it up. Get full screen. Experts warn hurricane in Hurricane Alley during hurricane season. Clear sign of climate change. I think that says it all. It wasn't unusual. It wasn't unprecedented. It was terrible. And you know what? Hurricanes are terrible. There's a reason why, despite the opportunity to do so, I don't live near the coast, on the coast of Texas. I value my property too much. I still have to worry about tornadoes, but they're sort of random events. Hurricanes hitting the coast of Texas, relatively predictable.
You know what? Most people don't. Well, I grew up in 61 through 65, living at A&M, And one of the first things my dad told me about, well, he always talked about the New England hurricanes, but once he was at A&M a couple of years, he learned about Indianola. Now, Indianola in the mid 1800s was the #1 port on the Gulf Coast. It was far ahead of Houston and Galveston. And they were building up, and then they got hit by a major hurricane. Well, they rebuilt. Then 11 years later, another major hurricane hit the port of Indianola. That's it for the port of Indianola. Galveston and Houston took over as the #1 port in the Gulf Coast. Now, Indianola, and maybe Sterling can help me out here, there is still an Indianola, Texas, and it's infamous in Texas history. But if you're a hurricane nut, you know a lot about Indianola, Texas. You know, I always tell people, Carla, you know, people were, Harvey was a terrible storm, of course, with all the rain, right? The rain in Harvey, and it got captured by a shock, cold trough, just like this got captured by a cold trough. What happens when colder air approaches a hurricane, a tropical system? It increases the condensation processes, so you're going to get all the water out of it, right? But anyway, Harvey's diameter of hurricane force winds was 75 to 100 miles. Carla gave hurricane force winds to the entire Gulf Coast of Texas. That's almost 400 miles. Now, how are those two storms both rated a 4? Well, because the wind speed right at the center of both storms was about the same. But it's my argument that this whole Saffir-Simpson scale is now being used as propaganda to say this storm and these storms are worse than before, when if we take into account what we do at WeatherBELL, our power and impact scale, which takes into account the radius of 34 knot winds, 50 knot winds, 64 knot winds, you can definitely see hurricanes, though just as intense at the center. Most of them are much smaller than they used to be. I mean, you could go down the road, Ida versus Betsy, Donna versus Ian versus Charlie, right? I mean, Ian was a big storm. Couldn't compare to Donna. Donna gave hurricane force winds all the way to Miami, wind gusts 100 miles an hour in Miami. We saw 60 to 70 at Ian. And Donna gave hurricane force winds to everybody from Florida to Maine. And the problem is, not only does the media not know about this, but the meteorologists that are all, putting all this, they look good on TV. A lot of them don't dig into the dirty work, right? To look behind it. And even if they did, they're probably not allowed to put the perspective on when they present something. I tell people all the time, why would a person who makes his life out of making forecasts and, different forecasts for events want to see the weather become less extreme? What good would that possibly do my company if the weather was becoming less extreme? I should be the guy that's screaming and yelling that it's getting worse. And, as nutty as I am, come to me for the forecast because I'm always looking for bad weather, right? And so it's more important to me to put everything into perspective and truth. And you've got to do some of the work yourself, folks, and go back and look at things, right? So you don't have, I just heard Marjorie Taylor Greene claim that the government's controlling the weather. I'm like, oh my gosh, no.
Yeah, if I was told that it was Elon Musk who could control hurricanes, I might believe it for a half a millisecond. But the government, I don't think so.
No.
All right.
Crazy.
All right, let's move on to our third item here in the crazy climate news of the week. And this is billionaires for BS. This comes to us from the Patriot Post, which I believe Joe Bastardi was once a contributor to.
Yes.
It says funding climate alarmism propaganda. Bill Gates and other rich leftists are funding a plan to turn journalists into propagandists of global doom. One would think, right? Yet, as with so much of the climate industry, this is from the story, it's all about the money. And since many of the leading climate cultists are also among the wealthiest folks on the planet, much of the mainstream media continues to pump out the propaganda. Folks still aren't buying the narrative, though, so these billionaire activists are doubling down. Last year, two of the leading climate cult groups, again, this is their words, Solutions Journalism Network and Covering Climate Now, sponsored the creation of the Climate Blueprint for Media Transformation. The Solutions Journalism Network is funded by the likes of for-profit Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, the Ford Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Hewlett Foundation. These organizations are pumping their vast wealth to promote climate change, alarmism. So what is the climate blueprint? This story says, in a nutshell, it's a 14-part guide that aims to turn journalists into climate activists by coaching them on how to cover climate change. The opening section, quote, the everything story, calls on journalists to inject the climate alarmist narrative into everything they cover, from sports to economics to crime. Climate change must be a front and center component. So now you can go to the story at the Patriot Post to read the rest, but this is something that we've mentioned from time to time on this program, but maybe we haven't really focused on it enough. The Associated Press, I believe, also gets funding from these sorts of left-wing foundations to fund the reporters on their climate desks, because their revenue is drying up in the regular stuff, and they can't afford to pay these reporters anymore. So, Sterling, I'm going to go to you first here.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice? I just gotta ask you, wouldn't it be nice if billionaires paid for balanced and accurate climate coverage? And instead they're pouring hundreds of millions of dollars.
It would be nice
with propaganda.
To me, it would be nice if billionaires stayed out of news coverage altogether.
Yeah.
Look, you've got Bezos, who runs the Washington Post. You've got Soros buying up all the radio stations. And why? Well, because radio is an outlet that still sometimes allows conservative voices and climate realists to speak. You've had a large cabal, a collaboration among the press to change how climate's talked about for over a decade, since the Los Angeles Times, at least, banned further realist voices in its pages. And publicly, it announced it. It had a story about it. And so a couple of years ago, these foundations started funding specific, giving big money, millions of dollars to the AP specifically to cover climate change, to expand its coverage, to hire new reporters, not for news coverage, for climate alarm coverage. We want you to stress the dangers of climate change. And with its marching orders in hand, it got more money the next year because it did its job. So I'm covering this story in next week's Climate Change Weekly. It's an important story. It shows what we're up against. Look, every day at our Climate Realism website, we respond to stories generated by these billionaires' dollars filtering through the press that are false. Every day we show them to be false, to be wrong, to be misleading. This is supposed to be the fourth estate. They are supposed to inform us so we can make informed judgments about public policies and how to live our lives with accurate information. And they've thrown that out the window. They've got their marching orders. It's bought and paid for. And yet, and they wonder why polls show journalists are falling into disrepute as well. That industry is the trust in the journalist. I guess it's above Congress, but not much.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Well, that's not saying a whole lot.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, if people wonder why the coverage is so unrelenting, it's because they're paid to write those stories. That's not journalism, that's propaganda. I'm a recovering journalist. My last story was 17 years, 6 months, and 12 hours ago. And I know how journalism is supposed to go, and it's supposed to be an objective observation of the world that you present to readers who are interested in what's happening in the world. And instead we have, especially on the climate desk at all these places, and we're going to actually have an example of that coming up in our main topic here. It's all about pushing propaganda, and it's well paid for. And the irony, of course, is that the left and journalists and environmentalists think that people like us, climate realists, the Heartland Institute, they think we are just swimming in all of this dark big oil money, when the exact opposite is actually the case. It's the other side that has all the funding. They have so much funding to give out, they're even paying for the propaganda at news outlets. It's just absurd. And so I wanted to highlight this because that's the truth instead of the myth that everybody believes.
They accuse you of what they're doing. This has been going on. I could tell my company, I probably cost our company money because of my outspoken stance on this. What I don't understand is, how do you, as a human being, okay, how do you? I guess I should understand this because I believe a lot of this goes back to spiritual combat. That there is spiritual combat going on, and if God is truth is a trait of God, what is hiding the truth, distorting the truth, or not telling the truth a trait of? So that keeps me sane. All right, because I can't understand. Now, I make mistakes. I say things. And I've gone back and admitted, oh man, I was wrong there. I was wrong there. I never say anything where I'm consciously saying, well, how can I manipulate this? I've never done that. And it got me in trouble where I used to work because they wanted me to spin things a certain way, and to the credit of the people I work for now, they basically said, well, think before you talk. Okay. That's what they say. But they never once said to me, hey, spin this way or spin this that way. So, and you could see what's happened because that particular company is all in for global warming. I mean, it's AccuWeather. I mean, have you ever seen an AccuWeather article in the last 10 years on their blogs that doesn't talk about how bad the global warming is? And it's smart business. I mean, it's great business because the worse it gets, the more you're going to go look for it. But what I don't understand is, how do you not at least go look at the other side of the issue? I just wrote this about the vice presidential debates. I'm looking right off the bat. I'm going, you can't possibly you're either ignorant of fact or you're deceptive. It can't be. It's got to be one or the other, right? And I don't understand it. This is not the way I was brought up. This is not the way. I mean, my dad, he had a really strict. Anything that is not the truth is a lie. So even if, I mean, it was kind of tough growing up in my family. Did you steal that pail? Well, it was out there at that kid's house. I don't know if that's stealing, Dad. Right? My point is, I don't understand how you can do that. How you could actually say, well, I'm just going to write what they tell me to write and not even look or consider that it might be wrong. Very hard for me to understand.
Well, it's pretty simple, Joe. When you're simply overwhelmed by your belief system, that's really all you want to look at. And that's what's the problem with a lot of media and climate alarmists. They are completely overwhelmed by a belief system that the earth is getting warmer and it's our fault and we have to do something about it. We have to take action now or we're going to roast in the near future and everything's going to die and the crops are going to stop growing and all this other stuff.
But I think that's part of it for some people, Anthony, that there are people caught up in the grips of a theory and an ideology, but the billionaires aren't. I do not believe these billionaires believe what they are telling us.
No, you can't.
I believe that they believe that what they are telling us makes them more money and gives them more power over our lives.
That's exactly right.
They're just seeing climate change and weather extremes as a tool.
That's correct. That's what I sincerely think is that for them, it's not about the truth. They don't care about the truth. It's not that they can't handle it. They don't care about it. The truth doesn't pad their bottom lines or give them more control over you. So they peddle fiction.
Amazing.
Yeah. And you can see this with the green energy stuff in particular. I mean, and that's what you have to have some discernment when you're talking to climate alarmists in your own life. Your aunt who is blathering on about climate change at the Thanksgiving dinner table probably is a true believer. She's not trying to trick you or something. But when you get someone like, I don't know, who is it that's opening up 3 Mile Island right now?
Bill Gates.
Microsoft, Bill Gates. Yeah, Bill Gates. Bill Gates, who has been talking for many years about how wind and solar actually cannot power what we need for AI and for even electric vehicles and all that stuff, but at the same time pushes for us to shut down coal and gas and to have higher penetration of wind and solar on the grid. He knows very well what he's doing, and it's energy feudalism, basically. He wants to have stable power for his company and his work.
Right.
But he thinks that us proles don't need it. We don't deserve that same level of comfort or security.
Well, it's very easy to get rid of this if you're so darn concerned about it. Plant a lot of trees and build nuclear power plants and keep fracking. I mean, if you're that concerned about it, the whole thing. The whole thing's folks. I was appointed to the Pennsylvania Action Climate Committee after the Inflation Reduction Act came out. Tons of money. It was all Green Deal stuff, right? I could only stand one meeting. I didn't have the time to drive down to Harrisburg, have people, God, please forgive me for saying this, pee down my back and tell me it's raining, because that's exactly what it was. I asked them, how many trees are there in Pennsylvania? None of them knew. I go, well, you probably should know, since each tree gets rid of 50 pounds of carbon dioxide. So that would be the 5 billion trees. That's 250 billion pounds. Anybody here know what our emissions are every year in Pennsylvania? None of them knew. Well, it's actually half of what our trees get rid of. Basically, Pennsylvania is a carbon negative state. None of them knew. And you should have heard, we're basing policy on the climate models. So I said, which model? And the lady that was giving the presentation from Drexel goes, that was silence. I go, there are 104 models. Which model are you basing it on? Basically, right? Nothing. That's what was astounding to me, that these are people that basically know nothing about the matter or anything that could possibly challenge their dogma, that were only looking for ways to spend money that's being given to them by the federal government in a way that basically set off inflation. And it's so crazy to me. I said, I can't waste the 90 minutes every 3 weeks coming down here to just listen to this. By the way, I was very polite. You guys would have been so proud of me. I was like Mr. Passive Aggressive.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. If you sat in there, you would have shot yourself in the head. I mean, I was just astounded by the level of, I've got to use the word, ignorance.
All right. Joe Bastardi, Agent of Chaos. This is an hour-long show, and we're at the 41-minute mark. And we haven't got to our main topic yet, so we're going to try to move on. There you go. Yeah, don't make me use the mute button. I'm not afraid. I will use it. All right, before we get on, we're going to have a little bit of fun, and that's our memes of the week. This comes from the Babylon Bee. Idiot Noah builds an ark when he could have just paid more taxes to stop climate change. Babylon Bee is peerless in that regard. We have a second one here. If we divide 125 genders by 3 bathrooms, how much climate change do we have? That's a lot of fun. And this last one, actually, I saw this. This was almost in the crazy climate news of the week. So President Biden had mentioned to reporters this week, he said he labeled people as brain dead to doubt the climate crisis fueled Hurricane Helene and urged everyone to put politics aside. Joe Biden said nobody can deny the impact of the climate crisis anymore. They must be brain dead if they do. Then, of course, on the right there is another older, wise gentleman. And he says, I believe that climate change is not a crisis. That's John Clauser. So one of these men is brain dead, and the other is the 2022 Nobel Prize winner in physics. You can write your own joke and draw your own conclusions.
Yeah,
all right.
I mean, should Joe Biden, knowing what we know about Joe Biden, what I think we've known for a lot longer than we've admitted, but certainly after the debate where he was finally forced to withdraw, should he or his handlers allow him to call anyone brain dead? That's like the pot calling the kettle black.
Well, I'm going to take it one. I'm going to take it one step further. I've got a poll on Twitter, and the poll says, given what we knew about this upcoming hurricane season, here it is it criminal in the face of a hurricane season that was forecasted to be this bad, and it's not done yet, to give money intended for disaster relief to illegal aliens and the crisis that we have with that this administration caused? Just what the heck is that? How can FEMA be out of money?
It's vote buying, Joe. Vote buying.
I understand that, but is that not okay? I can't even believe what I saw yesterday. We're giving you $750 checks. Now, whether you believe in the war in Ukraine or not, if you take how much money we have given to Ukraine and divide by the amount of people, the average person is getting $6,500. Of course, that's not what's happening. It's all going in the hands of whoever's getting it over there. But my point is, this is just total negligence for the common defense of the country, and it's one thing after another. And what's amazing, guys and gals, is that they can get up there and say that. Hey, Mayorkas has no qualms. We're out of money. How could you be out of money? The national.
Joe, stop skipping ahead on our program.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're going to get to that.
It's not just me. You know, I toot my own horn here. I'm sorry about that. But the National Hurricane Center told you how bad it was going to be. Were you not listening? Amazing.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I'm looking forward to listening to your new radio show in New York. But I pity your producer getting you to get out on time in each one of those things. Love you, Joe. All right, we're going to move on to our big thing, and it is dispelling is analyzing the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, especially in the Appalachian Mountains, and some myths. And so I found this story. I actually subscribed to a climate newsletter from the New York Times, and I think this kind of sets the stage pretty well. It says, climate havens do not exist. The worst damage from Hurricane Helene came in areas that were expected to be relatively immune from the effects of climate change. So this entire story goes with the premise that none of the readers would ever question that climate change, caused by us, of course, is what caused Helene to go into western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. So it says here, Asheville has long been described by some news outlets as a climate haven or a place that is safer from climate change. It doesn't experience wildfires common in parts of California or the storm surges that frequently upend life in coastal cities. Quote, I'd always felt like we were safe from climate change in this region. We talked about that a lot in town, said Erica Scott, a wedding photographer. Helene may have gotten an extra boost from the damp grounds left by rains that swept through the region before it hit Asheville, experts said. Scientists call this phenomenon the brown ocean effect because it causes waterlogged soil to influence a storm in the same way as sea surface does. It's too early to say exactly what role climate change had in this disaster, says the New York Times. But my colleague, Judson Jones, who covers weather for the Times, explained to me, we know that in general, warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor and produce more rainfall, exacerbating flood events like those seen from Atlanta to Asheville. Quote, we also know that the Atlantic Ocean, and in this case, the Gulf of Mexico, have been abundantly warm this season, and that warm water near the ideal temperature for a bath helped provide the energy Helene needed to rapidly intensify on Thursday. So yeah, I read a lot of excerpts there from that story, but there's a lot of myths to unpack there. I, for one, had never heard of the brown ocean effect. So Anthony, maybe you can get us started here. You can pick your myth in there, and maybe even just talk about the idea that that anyone could be safe from climate change.
Well, they're making the age-old conflation. They're saying that weather is actually climate change, or climate change is actually weather. And the bottom line is that there was never, ever, at any time on this planet, a safe haven from weather. Weather happens everywhere, all the time, 24/7, 365/millennia. Climate is not weather, and climate is nothing but a statistical construct. Climate is nothing but an average of weather over 30 years, the highs, the lows, the precipitation, all of that stuff. It is not a physical force in the atmosphere. And anyone who believes that climate is a physical force in the atmosphere and there's no place safe to hide from it is insanely deluded.
Well, we all live in a climate, and so none of us are necessarily, logically possible safe from climate change over, the trends over years. Concerning the idea that people had long considered places like Asheville or other places safe havens. I don't know anyone who ever used that term. I honestly don't know anywhere in the press where they said at one time or another, Asheville is a safe haven from hurricanes and climate change, or Eastern Tennessee is a safe haven from flooding. And I don't know that. I've never seen that. I think that's just made up. But anyone who's looked at the history would know that is false. And that's part of the problem is people don't know history. They don't know the history of Asheville's flooding or Tennessee's flooding or the Ohio Valley's flooding, where thousands of people were displaced and hundreds or more dead from flooding in history. Not in recent years. Look, the Galveston hurricane. What do people know about the Galveston hurricane? It's called the Great Galveston Hurricane because they didn't used to name storms. So the Great Galveston Hurricane killed more people than any other hurricane known in U.S. history, between probably 8,000 and 12,000. It took what was one of the largest cities in Texas and made it a rump city. But during the Republic, Galveston was for a brief time the capital of Texas. It will never and has never been so since again. So to pretend that there's any place that is, as Anthony said, safe from weather. Look, I have lived in Texas most of my life. I have lived through. I've been blessed. My homes have never been damaged, but I have seen tornadoes, not in the too far distance. I have seen homes near me on my block damaged by tornadoes. I've lived with it my whole life. And so I moved to Ohio for graduate school. And guess what? 3 times while I lived in Ohio, we were in the basements because they had basements there, hiding from tornadoes. There's no place on earth that is safe from significant disastrous weather events at some time or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. So Joe, this is one of the reasons, one of the many reasons we brought you on the show today, and that is to talk about kind of the history of storms like this. Up here on the screen for those watching on YouTube, this is from our friend Chris Smarts. He's showing a picture of Asheville, North Carolina. And that's a very old photo that looks to be around the turn of the 20th century, not the 21st century. Right. Or certainly from a long time ago. And it's just this idea, putting aside that there's a climate change haven somewhere on Earth. There's also been this idea, Joe, that this storm in particular was historic and that these sorts of things shouldn't be happening. That a hurricane should not have this kind of strength and be able to inflict this kind of damage in mountain towns in the Appalachians. So maybe you might want to address that a little bit.
Well, if you have the right situation, a hurricane can deliver what Hurricane Hazel did, hurricane force winds to Toronto and Buffalo. All right. If you listen, I am just really your New York Times thing. This brown ocean thing is total bull crap. Total bull crap. It's pushed. All right. It was trying to be pushed in Texas. The reason it rained so darn much is twofold. One, Asheville 2 to 3 days in advance was in the right front quadrant of the entrance region of the jet. That was the same right front quadrant that we jumped on and said that leads to intensification of northward moving hurricanes. Why? Because it is pulling air out of the column that it's advancing for. So it rains a lot there. You see it on the East Coast. We call them precursors. Right, Doria in 1971 flooded Bound Brook and all of northern New Jersey. The day before, there was tremendous rains as that happens, the very outflow that the hurricane is interacting with. They have been in a drought around Asheville all summer long, so there's no brown ocean to enhance this stuff. I get really mad at that because there's a couple of people that are pushing that should know better, and I keep standing them up and saying, would you kindly look at the 200 millibar level in advance of these things, and you can understand why it's going to rain and why the hurricane is going to intensify. All right, that's the first thing. The second thing is any place on earth, like my dad, I have the distinct benefit of having a father no other meteorologist in the country had. All right. My dad would show me storm tracks and say, you see that track in the 1933 hurricane into Virginia Beach, Joe? What would have happened if that storm had come up to the Delmarva Peninsula? What do you think would have happened to Philadelphia and Wilmington with a storm with 120 mile an hour winds pushing water up Delaware Bay? Same thing that would have happened in Providence in 1938, right? No place is immune. This is part of the whole victim mentality and what we've been teaching our kids, that life is very easy. Right? That life is supposed to, every day it's supposed to be 75 for a high and 61 for a low. And it's going to rain a quarter inch at 3 a.m. for your garden. And the unicorns are going to come out with lollipops and, the whole thing. And that's what's going on. And I bring this up and people get mad at me. The average male testosterone from 1950s to now at 35 years old is dropped in half. Do you know what that means? That you can't tolerate the atmosphere as much as people did in the 1950s. So you think it's tougher. You think, oh my gosh, it's up to now. Imagine you're a Washington Post climate writer. You go into work, it's 78 degrees in the morning. Let's say you're working during the day. You come out, it's 92, which is what, 2 degrees above normal in Washington. Oh my gosh, this is another hellish summer in Washington, D.C. And it's partly all this stuff. Our society is susceptible to listening to this because we have not taught our kids how to critically think and individualism, and that yes, you have to try to be a little bit tougher. If you were as tough as Sterling's in Texas, man, the 1950s in Texas, I'll tell you what, if I didn't study Texas weather, I wouldn't believe they would have happened. All right. I mean, it's outrageous what was going on there as far as the heat goes in a few of those summers. We actually reenacted it in 10, 11, and 12. So we had sort of a repeat of that. But you could just go back and look at that kind of thing. So I think I don't know where to start with this as far as that goes. I just wrote a big article on CFAC. You take a look at it as far as that goes. But everything you're seeing today is now, let me just say something. The climate is changing. The earth is warming, but it is actually warming in a distorted way that if you had the other agenda, you would be able to pick out just as many or more events that are less active than they used to be. Primary among them, the global ACE index, which could break a record low this year. That's how overall on the planet, that's how much of a lack of activity we've had. But you're never going to hear that. So
to clarify for our listeners, the ACE index is the accumulated cyclone energy index, which means the power.
Yeah. And that's kind of a crazy index too, because it's based on the 1 minute or whatever, the 10-meter wind speed of a hurricane or whatever. I think if I were running NOAA, the Hurricane Center would love me. I would fund an entire reanalysis based on the size and extent of the wind fields at 34 knots, 50 knots, 64 knots of every hurricane, along with incorporating the Saffir-Simpson scale, and we would really get a look at the difference. The average ACE index in the 1950s of every storm was over 10. The average ACE index in the last 30 years has been less than 8, which means, okay, we have more storms, but they're weaker, right? So we're actually going the other way when you actually look at the ACE index objectively.
Yep, 100%. Yeah. So there's a little bit more on this that I wanted to bring up, and there was this post on X by Stephen McIntyre of Climate Audit. He was one of the two heroes who helped debunk the Michael Mann's hockey stick, by the way, with math. He notices here that a good point about Helene and flooding in the Tennessee River and its tributaries on X. I know, Anthony, you had seen this if you want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, here's the bottom line. Much of western North Carolina saw tremendous amounts of rain due to orographic lifting of the atmosphere associated with the rotation and the winds of Hurricane Helene. So the mountains, the slopes of the mountains on the east side got far more rain than they're used to because of the way that the hurricane impacted the state. And so all that water had to run off and go somewhere. Well, the Tennessee Valley Authority, when it was put into effect, basically created flood control dams all up and down Appalachia, because it used to be that Appalachia would flood catastrophically, and they wanted to stop that. However, it turns out that in Asheville, where the French Broad River there, they didn't put any dams in there. Why? Because there was local opposition. Either some NIMBYs or some early environmentalists said, we can't have dams here because it's too scenic or it's too pristine or whatever. So if it's basically, they left themselves open to the same kind of situation meteorologically that happened in 1916 and again in 1940. And here they are whining about climate change costs. Well, that's bunk. If you'd had some dams there on that river, you would have had flood control, but you chose not to.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to bring up, I forgot to bring this up. Okay, you saw how much rain occurred there in a one-day period. Camille, 69, went into Biloxi 3 days later, dumped 31 inches of rain in 6 hours in parts of the James River Valley of Virginia. I still have never seen a rate of rainfall like that in such a, it's a relatively large area. Of course, we put Richmond underwater. It was really bad. These things can do that whenever they encounter colder baroclinic systems. This idea of warm air can hold more water. No, that's not what that means. It means the column of air is expanded. There's still the same amount of water vapor in the air, maybe a little bit more. But what happens is if you suddenly contract it, there's condensation processes and they all occur at once, right? So that's what you see going on. All these unbelievable floods, almost all of them, are occurring with cold upper air troughs that buckle in, combine with the storm, and set these things off. So it's a combination of two things we know about that. Okay, you guys remember Joaquin? Well, the GFS was forecasting 30 to 40 inches of rain in parts of South Carolina because it was trying to trap Joaquin with the upper air low that was coming from the northwest. And instead, Joaquin took off to the northeast. So you had there's still a lot of rain in the Carolinas with that upper low. But the point of the matter is you had two systems that happened, upper air lows and the hurricane, but they didn't combine. So they didn't cause the kind of thing that you saw with this combination of two relatively normal systems do lead to the extraordinary. And that's what weather and nature does.
Just real quick comment. I know that we want to go to questions, but real quick comment. So I was really offended by this idea of a climate change safe haven that they said experts have long considered X, a climate change safe haven. Do a simple word search, climate change safe haven in quotation marks, and see how far back you can find anyone mentioning that, aside from this past week when New York Times ran a story with that actual phrase. You won't find stories. That's just made up. If someone did it, very rare.
The European has a disaster for Tampa. Holy smokes. That we're very good. WeatherBELL, we're really concerned about that. This thing is going to come across and hit Tampa if it hits Tampa just to the north. Oh boy. I'm sorry. I'm watching the weather while I'm doing this. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we have a viewer here that asks us if we can have Joe on every week. And as much as we'd love to, the answer is no, because he's busy. He's got his own show, and this show has a time limit.
And the other thing is too, the other side has all the money. Big Oil and the Koch brothers are not supplying us. These guys can't afford combat pay. All right.
That's right. That's right. All right. So Jim Moses asked, when is question and answer time? That time is now. With the time that we have left, we will try to get as many questions as we can. Linnea, take it away. Nope, you're on mute, Linnea.
I think she's muted. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Everybody gets one per episode.
That's right.
I've got a comment to start with from Redneck Screw Loose. It's been a bit since we've seen you in the comments, man. All right. Despite Helene, I have great news. The second offshore wind energy project off the south coast of Oregon has been stopped. So that is good news for you guys. Let's see. Oh, this is, I think we brushed on this, but I'm going to hope that we can get a little bit of a concise description of what exactly is going on here. And this is from Chris Nisbet, who says, can Joe talk about this simple science argument that says something like 1 degree Celsius of warming means 7% more moisture, which means more or less rain? If true, shouldn't we have seen the rainfall changes already?
Well, the thing is, when you say one degree Celsius warming, it's not just, it's going to just warm 1 degree everywhere around the planet. The bulk of the warming has occurred in the Arctic and Antarctic during their winter seasons. So if you were to take from, let's say, the Arctic Circle down to the Antarctic Circle, the warming would be much less. In addition, and I talk about this all the time, what we call distorted warming. When it warms more away from the equator than at the equator, it leads, even though the total energy may increase, the zonal potential energy, the difference between the poles and the equator, decreases and leads to less, the idea of less events. In fact, the worst thing that could happen, the best thing for me, because I like wild weather, is if it starts getting colder. If it starts getting colder, there's more clash. You do not have problems if there's no argument going on in the weather. And the old Texas A&M that my dad taught me when he was there, climate and weather are merely nature's way of trying to balance out an imbalance that she can't do to the design of the system. Now that really gets them mad, because when you say design, oh, hey, look at that, he's one of these God squatting, what do you call? Well, guess what? I don't care who you say did it. There is a design to the system, and you can't control it. Nah. Sorry.
Thank you, Joe. We have another question from Andrew. I'm going to pitch it to Sterling. I think this will get you on a good rant. This is from Andrew Godridge, who asks, what will they do when zero is reached? Sterling, you're muted.
Sterling, I think you're muted. Look at that. See, everyone gets one a show.
Everyone gets one a show. Thanks for bringing that up, Linnea. Now I can excuse myself. So I should say I'm not overly concerned about what will they do if net zero is reached, since I don't think net zero will ever be reached. That's sort of counterfactual. But were net zero to be reached, honestly, there wouldn't be much to do other than now trying to explain why it's okay or a good idea that everyone's now living in poverty, and that the furs that they used to hate, now it's good that we're killing animals for their skins, because we can't have polyester and other clothing materials. So caves are a great place to live, sod huts. They'll be out there on a PR pitch trying to tell us why living back in the Pleistocene ages is a good idea. And still why there's too many people until enough sufficient numbers of people die off. And then they can say, now we've reached sort of the environmental nirvana. We live in harmony with nature. But I'm not overly concerned about that, because I just don't think we'll ever reach net zero. So they'll always have net zero out there. Just like, look, every year or every 10 years, they come out with their prediction. If we don't act now, in 10 years, the world ends. If we don't act now, they keep saying it. We reach the time period, and they have to reset like the death cult that they are. Well, that's what they'll do with net zero. When we don't reach net zero, they'll say, well, but we can still reach it in 2060. Oh, we can still reach it in 2075. Oh, we got to reach it by 2100. They'll just keep pushing the timetable back to reach net zero.
Thank you very much, Sterling. Okay, let's see here. We have... This can go to anyone who feels like pitching in. Does FEMA really not have the money to provide aid to those affected by the hurricane, or are they vying for that $50 billion Help Helene victims money laundering bill?
Well, they really did deplete the emergency fund at FEMA, and they sent it off to illegal aliens for housing and food and whatnot, because apparently taking care of illegal aliens in America is more important than taking care of your citizens that have just been through a disaster. The level of disgust I have for this is off the charts.
Well, equity, look, across the Biden administration's all agencies, equity has become a top concern, right? And equity to illegal aliens counts more than equity to poverty-stricken regions in the U.S.
It's amazing, isn't it? They depleted the strategic oil reserve, and then they depleted FEMA's money. And you can't make it up. And you've got one cackling out there in Las Vegas while the Southern Appalachians are underwater and the other one's on the beach. And I mean, Anthony, I think that my level of disgust exceeds your level of disgust. How's that?
Yeah,
we need it. We need a Climate Realism Show disgustometer. That's what we need.
Yeah. I think there's some kind of a historical precedent for government robber barons kind of emptying the coffers at a certain stage of the empire. So, okay, let me look for another question here for us. Oh, here's one from William Schugart, who says, "Isn't 30 years much too short a time horizon for evaluating climate change? Shouldn't it be eons?" This goes to
Yeah.
Anthony.
Let me tell you a funny story, and it's a true story. One of my mentors was Jim Goodridge, who was the former state climatologist of California. He was he was trained in the Navy in meteorology, and he became the state climatologist after he got out of the Navy. And he was very meticulous, and he was very pleasant and very thorough about records. And one day I asked him, why do we have a 30-year period for climate? And why is that? And he said, well, it's pretty simple, really. When we started doing climate analysis, tracking temperature over each month, we ended up with basically having to do it with pen and paper on ledgers. And the ledgers were all 31-day calendars. And that just happened to work really well for tracking climate over years, too. So basically, we have a 30-year climate period pulled out of thin air simply because the paper ledgers and a 31-day period. I kid you not.
Well, and what you're talking about, the 30-year period is, they average it over that 30 years, and that's your single data point. And then you plot that against other averages over time, right?
Right.
And if you do that, to be fair, if you look at entire regions of the Earth, nothing much has changed. So go to Death Valley. 30 years ago, it was very arid and dry and hot. It's still very arid and dry and hot. Has the Sahara Desert changed much? Well, around the edges, it's got some greening, but in the depths of the Sahara Desert that make up the vast majority of it, nothing's changed. Antarctica, still a frozen, I won't say wasteland. I think it would be pretty neat to visit for a short period of time, but it's still a frozen frozen continent down at the bottom of the. So really, on large scales, in lots of areas, despite all the talk about climate change, for most of them, climate hasn't changed much at all.
Yeah, a good point there is that, and Joe will understand this, there's the Köppen climate classification. It's a map that shows all the different climate zones all around the world. How many of those have changed radically over the past 30 years due to climate change? I think it's none.
Yeah, none, other than the greening a little bit of the Sahara. But am I wrong? What do they find under the ice when it does melt in certain places in places like Greenland? They find vegetation, petrified vegetation, if I fossilized vegetation, if I remember right. But
and tools, and they find tools,
yeah,
and they find shells, which means there were oceans there at one time.
Instead of sitting there and looking at the wonderment and amazement and the majesty of the creation, these people, they're narcissistic enough to think that these things are happening and they are so important that they have to stop the natural evolution of what the climate and the weather will do. They think they're above it. You got to understand and I'm sorry I'm say this because I would probably have a lot of people don't share my ideas on God and all this. There is a definite God-like, I'm not going to call it quality, idea behind these people, that they are smarter than everyone in the room. You know why I've had any success? I have always felt I'm the dumbest man in the room, but I want to learn. And when I wrestled at Penn State, I was the worst guy on the team, but I wanted to get better. So I wrestled everybody constantly, and it took some beatings. But it's the same thing. I've taken so many beatings in the weather. I get frustrated because I will see guys that are better than me intuitively. I can see it. People who don't even have degrees in meteorology, and I have to learn by being corrected. But so see what happens. But the thing is that I don't like losing. So once I'm corrected, I can say, okay, well, I'm going to see that again. And here's what I will tell you, that people that predominantly research things and don't get in there and fight in real-time weather forecasting are at a distinct disadvantage in coming up to an objective conclusion about climate. Because if you look at everything and your job and your income depends on being right enough, more so than an outstanding National Weather Service, you will search for the right answer rather than the answer that you're told to tell people. Sorry. I have to say I'm sorry after every rant over here. This is sorry.
Yeah, good. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to pick this one because I don't know what's going on here, but I think, Joe, you probably do. And that is, why did they keep the track of the hurricane going through the spine if Georgia and then Tennessee through Saturday, when we could visibly see that it had split going northeast into the Carolinas?
Well,
That doesn't make any sense to me.
Our track was always up through east of Atlanta, because we wanted to emphasize to our clients in Atlanta that they weren't going to get crushed, because a track up and west of Atlanta, I mean, you had 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts all the way up to Spartanburg, and of course in those mountains they got hammered. And once it came over the mountains, what was left of it, they just basically followed the low pressure. But the center of the storm, again, read the CFACT article I did today. You could see the center of the storm at 7 a.m. in the morning was still very well organized as it was coming into the mountains. Now, when you say split, that's an interesting terminology, because you're talking about a lot of times, you may see a big area of clouds go off to the northeast, but the low to mid-level center is still intact coming over the mountains. And then the reason you don't get the heavy rains on the other side of the mountains not as bad is because you downslope. You dry out. There's, we talk about orographic lifting, but we have orographic sinking also. And so it dries out quite a bit coming out down the other side of the mountains. And I'm not aware of this split in the track thing. It looked like it went up where we thought. It went up between Augusta, Athens, to the west of Asheville, and then over the mountains. And then, once it got into Tennessee, in fact, I felt bad last Friday because what I was doing was looking at the next system that I thought was going to start evolving in the Gulf of Mexico, and people are starting to see that now. That's a real serious situation for Florida, because they've had a lot of rain, especially at Southwest Florida. So anyway.
Hey, Joe, I have a question for you. We used to give hurricane names only female names, and then in 1978, it was switched to include male and female names.
Right.
So now, given the wokeness of our current situation, do we need to start putting pronouns in front of hurricane names?
Well, it's very interesting you bring that up, because I've always brought up, what about if something comes from the Atlantic, crosses into the Pacific, and then turns north? We had that Hattie alias Inga alias Simone alias Inga in 1960. Hurricane Hattie went across Central America and became Simone in the Pacific, then turned north and became Inga in the southern Gulf of Mexico. I mean, let me tell you, this is potentially serious right now. The trough that got Helene has moved out into the Atlantic. And I want you to look real close northwest of Kirk. Captain Kirk. We have a very vigorous low-level circulation over 84-degree water. This could, in a long stretch, get a male name. What are we going to do with all this stuff? And then we got Leslie, who's stalling. So we have Leslie, Stall, and Captain Kirk in the Atlantic right now. Think about that. No other meteorologist is going to bring that up.
No, indeed not. But I do appreciate you being on the show, Joe Bastardi. We always have so much fun, personally, behind the scenes, especially on the program. I want to thank you, our live audience, for being here on YouTube and Rumble. It's so much fun to have you here with us, and hope you can bring some new friends next time. The more the merrier around here. I want to thank our streaming partners, junkscience.com, CFACT, and What's Up With That. And again, thank our special guest, Joe Bastardi, so you can check out his new radio show, The Wise Guys of Weather, on AM 970 The Answer in New York City. It's very easy to find online, so you can listen to current and past programs. Always visit climaterealism.com. Always visit climateataglance.com. Go to What's Up With That for some fantastic news and commentary on the weather, which you can also get at heartland.org, where you can subscribe to Climate Change Weekly. That's heartland.org/subscribe.
WeatherBELL.com, remember?
WeatherBELL.com for Joe Bastardi. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Linnea. Thank you, Sterling. And thank you very much, producer extraordinaire, Andy Singer. And we will see you next Friday. Bye-bye.
Blah, 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 blah.